Hello and welcome to all of you. This is my third and the last lecture on Munshi Premchand's The Shroud or Coffin. And the title of this lecture is The Invisible Woman and the Visible Wound, the caste gender nexus in Premchand's The Shroud. In the second class, that is the previous class, we talked about various wounds of feudalism in the story The Shroud. And the social wound, the moral psychological wound, the symbolic wound, these were the various wounds that we discussed. And then we contrasted Premchand's realism with Gandhian idealism. And finally, we discussed some of the key moments, some of the key scenes from the text, and critically analyzed those scenes. Now, in this class, we are going to focus on what is at the very heart of this story's tragedy, the invisible, the unbreakable link between caste and gender. This link is the engine that drives the narrative forward to its devastating conclusion. We'll also look into the hierarchy within the hierarchy, and we'll look into the major themes of this story that spring from the nexus of caste gender. And finally, we'll have close reading of some of the important scenes from the text. And at the end, we'll examine the most debated aspect. Are Ghisu and Madhav simply lazy, or is their laziness something more complex? We need to understand the social order first. The social order, the social world the characters are trapped in the story The Shroud. If you imagine a social ladder, a ladder of power in a traditional Indian village during Premchand's time, you will see that at the very top of that ladder there is a Brahmin, a Thakur. He is a landlord. He is often an upper caste, a Brahmin or a Thakur. The landlord holds the land, the economic power, and consequently the judicial and the social power. His authority is final. His authority is not merely economic but also moral and ritualistic. He sets the norms. And after him come the peasants and the artisans with some small plots of lands or with some specific skills. And at the very lowest rung of that ladder, there are the Dalits, the untouchables. And in the story The Shroud, Ghisu, Madhav and Budhiya belong to that category, the Dalit. So this is the ladder based on caste. This is caste hierarchy. This caste hierarchy is rigid, it is birth-based, and it dictates one's life's possibilities with the force of divine law. Now you imagine another ladder, a ladder based on gender hierarchy. This ladder places men above women, both inside home as well as outside. A man is considered to be the master of the household. He is the breadwinner, the protector, and the decision maker whose authority is final. And in this ladder, a woman's worth is tied intrinsically to her role as a daughter, a mother, or a wife. Her labor within the home, her reproductive capacity, her obedience, and her sexual purity, which is guarded as family honor. Her body and labor are not her own. They are the resources that are managed by the men of her family. So these are the two ladders. One is the ladder of social power, another is the ladder of gender. Now, what happens when these two ladders intersect, when they merge? When these two ladders intersect, what happens to a person who is poor, low caste, at the same time who is a woman? So, a poor, low caste woman stands at a point where the entire weight of these two ladders crashes down upon her. Hence, her experience is qualitatively different from that of a low caste man or an upper caste woman. So, thus, a low caste woman like Budhya is triply oppressed by her caste, by her class, she is poor, and at the same time by her gender. Her labor in the fields of the landlord or in the home of her husband is most exploited. Her suffering is most invisible. We see in the story that Ghisu and Madhav, they are hated by everyone in the village and they are denied dignity and they are exploited by their caste and class. And they have internalized this humiliation. But within the four walls of their home, they dominate over the women in their family. The powerlessness and the violence they absorb from the upper castes is often redirected, consciously or not, onto the women in their family. Budhya, Madhav's wife, is the ultimate victim of this nexus of caste and gender. I quote, Madhav's marriage had taken place the year before. Since this woman had come, she had laid the foundations of civilization in the family. Grinding grain, cutting grass, she arranged for a couple of pounds of flour and kept filling the stomachs of those two shameless ones. After she came, they both grew even more lazy and indolent. Indeed, they even began to swagger a bit. Now, let's focus on the major themes of the story. The first one is the theme of invisibility and erasure. In the story, the shroud Premchand makes Budhya narratively invisible. If we look into the role that Budhya plays in the story, we will see that she plays as a catalyst. Her labor pain begins the story. Her death sets the central crisis, the need for a shroud, and her memory haunts the climax. And we never see her face. We never hear from her. She never speaks a word of dialogue. We never access her thoughts or fears. She exists only in third-person fragments. The narrative deliberately portrays Budhya in that manner to mirror her social reality. Her domestic labor, cooking, cleaning, fetching water is expected and unseen. Her reproductive labor, which now kills her, is a natural event. Her potential wage labor is subsumed under the family's collective poverty. And by erasing Budhya from the narrative, Premchand makes her absence scream louder than any soliloquy about her pain ever could. Premchand forces the readers to look for Budhya to fill the void where her character should be, and in doing so, we feel the weight of Budhya's social erasure. Now we'll discuss the theme of perverted care and ritual hypocrisy. In the story, Kafana the Shroud, the central symbol, that is the shroud, is drenched in the irony of the nexus. A shroud is an object, a ritual object, a final garment believed to preserve the dignity of the dead. It is believed to provide closure and ensure smooth passage to the afterlife. It is a sacred obligation of the living towards the dead, heavily emphasized in Hindu custom. For Budhya, who lived a life stripped of all dignity, likely clothed in rags, hungry, overworked, this ritual is a profound cosmic cruelty. This is hypocrisy. And Ghisu voices this absurdity with a clarity that cuts through centuries of custom. He says, I quote, "What a bad custom it is that someone who didn't even get a rag to cover her body when she was alive needs a new shroud when she is dead. After all, the shroud burns along with the body." So Ghisu sees the ritual not as a sacred duty. He sees it as an economic imposition, a final extraction from the poor by the value system of the rich. And the community's performative concern for Budhya's afterlife shames the family, but it never translates into a critique of the system that made her life and now her death, her dignified death, impossible. The theme of emotional alienation and commodified grief. Premchand shows in the story how this caste gender nexus invades the interior life, that is, the life of human emotion. When Budhya finally dies, Ghisu and Madhav did not sink into quiet personal grief. Instead, what they do, they actually perform. And there is a purpose behind their performance. There is a purpose behind this performance. First, it conforms to a social expectation. It shows that they are not completely inhuman. And secondly, it is an opening gambit in a transaction. Their tears are a currency. Their exaggerated sorrow is a performance designed to validate their upcoming request for charity. So grief must be useful. So this caste gender nexus has thus commodified their very capacity to mourn. Now we'll have close reading of two very important scenes of the story: the opening scene and the final scene, the death vigil and the final feast. The opening scene is set with stark symbolic contrast. While we see Budhya thrashing about in pain inside a cold, dark heart, these two men, Ghisu and Madhav, they sit outside by a glowing fire and they are eating boiled potatoes and they are talking and they are reminiscing about good food, and finally they go to sleep. And their conversation, the conversation between Ghisu and Madhav, is a masterpiece of tragic irony. They do not discuss Budhya's pain. Instead, as Budhya's moans provide a morbid soundtrack, Ghisu embarks on a vivid, sensuous reminiscence. I quote, "Puris, kachuris, halwa, so many curries. I must have eaten at least 20 puris. So this is not simply callousness or stupidity. This is a profoundly psychological and social act. Faced with the immediate, terrifying reality of death, Gisu's mind seems to escape the reality. And their inaction is a form of passive violence. It is the patriarchy of the powerless, the assertion of their right to be idle. And the space itself tells the story of a gender divide. And now we'll focus on the final feast, the final scene, which is the most infamous, most morally complex scene. After Budhiya's death, and after collecting the money to buy shroud, when Ghisu and Madhav go to the bazaar, go to the market, we see that the marketplace assaults their senses with other possibilities. The glow of the liquor shop, the sizzle of the snacks, and the allure of the sweets. And the ghost of Gisu's earlier critique returns. He says, I quote, "How does it matter if the shroud is cheap or expensive? It's going to burn anyway. No one is going to dig it up later to check if it was thick or thin." It is not just an excuse. It is a perverse form of reasoning born out of absolute material deprivation. And we see that finally, by their reasoning, they succumb to their sensory pleasure of drinking and feasting. And in their state of intoxicated, expansive sentimentality, they turn to Budhiya's memory. As Madhav declares, I quote, "Whoa, what a wife she was, a gem of a woman. She never left us to go hungry. She worked herself to the bone." This scene is Premchand's ultimate devastating commentary on the caste-gender nexus. Firstly, it is a class-caste act of rebellion. Ghisu and Madhav defiantly misuse the landlord's charity. They convert capital meant for a ritual upholding social order, that is a proper burial. They convert it into a personal sensual binge. And it is the ultimate act of subversion by the lazy laborer, a strike not against work but against the symbolic order of their oppressors. Secondly, it is the ultimate patriarchal betrayal and perversion of care. They honor Budhiya not with the cloth society demands for her corpse, but by consuming the food and drink they were denied in life. So the money for Budhiya's shroud becomes the means of Ghisu and Madhav's satiation. The act of mourning becomes an act of self-gratification. And thirdly, the drunken eulogy is the final piercing irony in the story. Ghisu and Madhav's recognition of Budhiya's worth, like I quote, a pearl, a jewel, these recognition comes only when Budhiya is permanently gone, and only through the haze of alcohol. And it is utterly useless, profoundly selfish, and born too late. So now we'll come to the most debated issue in the story, that is the laziness of Ghisu and Madhav. As we have seen in the story, Ghisu and Madhav are the laziest of lazy. They are the embodiment of laziness. They avoid any kind of physical work. They live off petty theft and chance, and they neglect their most basic duties. And all the villagers condemn them. But My question is Premchand holding them up as moral failures? To label them merely lazy seems to adopt the very perspective of the landlord and the judging villagers, to see the symptom and blame the patient while ignoring the disease itself. Premchand, the reformist realist, pushes his readers to look deeper. Ghisu and Madhav's inaction, their profound apathy, is not primarily a personal or moral failing. It could well be a learned, a logical, and even rational response to a system which is designed to break their body, spirit, and will. Ghisu and Madhav seem to have internalized a brutal empirical truth from a lifetime of observation that hard physical labor in the landlord's field does not lead to security, prosperity, or dignity. I quote, the narrator in the story says, I quote, a society in which those who labored night and day were not in much better shape than these two. A society in which, compared to the peasants, those who knew how to exploit the peasants' weaknesses were much better off. Unquote. So, Ghisu and Madhav's laziness can be reinterpreted as a subconscious strike, a withdrawal of the only commodity they truly own, that is their physical labor, from an economic system that is fundamentally exploitative and extractive. So it is a passive resistance which ironically traps them in a vicious cycle of deprivation. Ghisu and Madhav's indifference to Budhia's pain is like a mirror held up to the world's indifference to them, to their pain. They have been systematically dehumanized by the caste system, stripped of all social dignity, and that learned dehumanization plays out in the most intimate of spaces, that is their family. If your life has no value, how can you be expected to fully value another's? So we must look carefully at what they are lazy about, what Ghisu and Madhav are lazy about. They are not too lazy to steal potatoes, to gather woods, make a fire, walk to the landlord's house, or traverse to the market. They show initiative and energy in securing their own immediate sustenance. But their laziness is specifically directed towards the socially mandated duties of a patriarch and a breadwinner in a peasant household, that is consistently working to provide for and protect the women in the household. In failing Budhia catastrophically, Ghisu and Madhav in a way are rejecting one script that the society offers them. They lack the land, the capital, the social capital, and the hope to act out that role successfully. Therefore, Ghisu and Madhav's failure becomes a form of negative agency. It is a refusal to participate in a charade that they are doomed to lose. Premchand here is not critiquing their laziness in a simple, moralistic, finger-wagging way. What he's doing, Premchand is basically diagnosing a deep social disease. He shows us that what looks like individual moral decay is actually the symptom of a systemic exploitation, systemic poison. The caste gender nexus does not just exploit bodies for economic gain, it also corrodes, it also destroys souls, it severs the bonds of human connection, and makes virtues like love, care, and responsibility seem like unaffordable luxuries in the brutal arithmetic of survival. And thus, the story, The Shout, ends with no hope, no resolution, no moral lesson. In the last scene, we see Ghisu and Madhav. They are asleep, drunk, their bellies full for once. And Budhia's body lies unshrouded, awaiting a burning that may never happen or will happen with whatever scraps are left. So the nexus of caste and gender, the interlocking systems of caste, class, and gender oppression remains utterly intact, unchallenged by the story's events. Premchand thus leaves his readers with a haunting, unanswered question that vibrates long after the last sentence. In a world where a low-caste woman can be so completely erased out, first in life, then in death, and finally in memory, where does genuine change even begin? Does the change begin with a socialist reform, or with an anti-caste reform, or with a feminist or humanist reform? The story, The Shroud, in its relentless pessimism, seems to argue that all these reforms are inseparable. Economic exploitation, caste exploitation, patriarchy, all of them are intrinsically connected. One cannot fight one, leaving the others out. Budhia's invisible story is therefore the most important one. She seems to be the limit point of Premchand's realism. And in her erasure, we find the story's deepest truth. And Budhia is Premchand's starkest challenge to us to learn to see the person the world has so effectively trained us not to see, and to understand that her silent tragedy, the story within the story, is the truest, most damning measure of a society's moral failure. So that's all for this class. Thank you. Goodbye.